Diddle-a-dum-dum, British Strongman Podcast. Today we are going to cover moving events and little things that you can employ in your training straight away that are just going to make you get a little bit better at moving events measurably. Everybody seems to have like a decent plan where they're progressing the deadlifts and their overhead and stuff, because it's like, I suppose it's quite very easily measurable, isn't it? Like you put your 1.25s on either side and you get your progression. Whereas with moving events, sometimes it isn't. You have to think a bit more outside the box to get the kind of measurability. And if you're anything like me, I need something quantifiable. Otherwise, I just won't do it. If I can't see the progression session on session in some way, I just won't do it and won't be motivated to execute it. So Shane, I'll ask you. So what are when people are training, when you see people training moving events like on social media or you see people at comps, what are the biggest kind of bugbears that you have with people's general training?
The most common one is one that everybody speaks about, but it's because it is the most common one, which is not timing your events. So just going over 20 meters and thinking, "Oh, that was quick," and not actually knowing the exact time you got. Because with moving events, I like to. I'm quite simplistic in my weight selections for people, and the way I like to do it is like have like a weight that is kind of the standard for an average comp at this person's weight class. And you've got to realize that that's it's getting the time down on around those weights that's going to score points. So you need to have like your progressions in place, just like you do on your deadlift and stuff. But it needs to be more focused upon not just getting like a certain amount of weight, 20 meters, but getting it a certain distance in a certain time. So therefore, when you're doing your, like volume runs or whatever on a yoke, for example, you need to know that your 5 sets you're doing at 70, 80%, whatever it is, you need to know that they're going in the time that you want them to be, or else you're going to be drilling like the wrong foot pattern, etc. Like if you're just doing let's say you're training for a 300 yoke over 20 meters and you're doing 230 to start for 5 sets. If you're just flying at 20 meters and you think you're lightning, then as you go to 240 and 250, you're probably going to still feel like you're going really fast, but you don't see the difference in time. You might be adding a second to each run. And without tracking it like that, you're never going to be able to have a proper progression. You're just guessing basically. And that's a big flaw that I see, especially when people use lighter weight. They just think, "Oh, it's fast, I won't time it." And it's quite important to time, because then when you add weight to the next week, for example, your goal then is, let's get it the same time or even faster than what I did last week. And that way you're progressing linearly instead of just adding weight and slowing down your time every progression, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's great. So I think a key thing with the moving events is what a lot of people seem to have is they think like going there. They think, "Oh, well, I'm training yoke or training farmers, so I need to go heavy." And you see people and they just go heavy, and they're not necessarily getting that much out of it. Whereas because they don't see the value in going lighter, because they're not measuring kind of what they're doing, like we've said. So say, for instance, like I think that's great actually, Shane, what you've just said about, say, for instance, you compete at, say, intermediate level, and you might need to be good with 300 yoke. I think what Shane's saying is absolutely brilliant about maybe having like, say, a time PB for 20, say, measure your distance, whatever you can train with at your setup. Yeah, 20 meters would be ideal, but some people don't have that luxury. You might have 10 meters, you might have 8 meters. I have some people that I coach who measure in lamp posts. Like he just knows, right, I'm doing 5 lamp posts today, and this is the time. And then next session we can do 4 lamp posts. Like it doesn't have to be meters, as long as you're getting that kind of continuous kind of consistent measurability that you can track your own data. Yeah, ideally if you have like a measuring stick or whatnot, and you can mark out a track, that's going to be great, because then you'll be able to measure your data against people who you're going to compete against, and you're going to be able to set your targets more that are actually more relevant. But everybody can measure. Even if you don't have your measuring stick, just measure something to the wall and back or whatever, and then time it. But I think what Shane's saying is absolutely brilliant. So say, for instance, you compete at, like, say, intermediate level, and you're doing a 300 yoke, and it's probably going to be a 120 farmers or something like that. Like you can be using as your little measurability tools over your 20 meters or 40 meters, 30 meters, whatever. You could measure your speed and study how your speed changes when you do 100 farmers compared to 110, compared to 120, and maybe go a bit heavier and go 130, and use those levels as like your kind of almost like training levels, if you will. You can do the same thing with a yoke. You can go, like, say, 260, 280, 300, 320, and measure what your performance is like, and study what your kind of drop-off rate is with the speed. Compare your 260 yoke to your 320 yoke. Is it a similar speed, or have you dropped off quite a bit? Like,
that's such a good point, because that's something I use, which is like, say someone's trying to get faster at 300 yoke. I always think if it's like a 20-meter sprint, I'm always wanting people as like top 3 spaces to be sub 10 seconds. You know what I mean? It's like that's kind of your winning time, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what I get them to do is like 200 yoke. What's that? 7 seconds. 220, 7.9, 8 seconds. 240 might be like 8.5. Then it might go like 270 and it goes like 11 seconds. And then when you see that, you're like, right, this is the kind of area we need to be.
Exactly. Yeah. Perfect. So if you've got that drop off rate between whatever Shane said, 240 to 270, like what we could be looking at, like a little, that can just write your next 4-week block or your 4-week progression. You could say, right, well, next week we're going to work with 250, but you've got to keep it sub 10. And then see if we can get 3 or 4 sets within that. And if they achieve that speed, then the following week we can sneak it up to 255, 260, still keeping sub 10. But if they're not achieving that sub 10, you might have a couple of weeks at that, or you might have a couple of, another progression could be right. Well, we're going to increase the distance to 30 meters or something, whilst maintaining the kind of same meters per second speed or whatever throughout. Another little thing that I like to do is, if you're training for a comp specifically and you've got a big prep. So say for me, for example, right, I'll use Official Strongman Games Worlds, right? It's 360 car walk for 15 meters. So I've got 8 or 9 months or whatever to prep for this. What I think would be good for me to do is, instead of, like, say, just training all my yoke for speed and aiming for, say, 15 meters in sub 7.5 seconds, like, realistically, I don't think I'm going to be hitting that speed with 360 by then. I just think it is quite heavy. But what I think what would be good for somebody like me to do would be, in the next couple of weeks when I'm feeling good, do a little test at the comp setup where I do 360 for 15 meters. And say, for instance, I do, I don't know, say 11 seconds or something like that. That's my kind of tester. So for 15 meters. So I know that actually if I've gone max effort at 11 seconds for 15 meters, like, realistically training at 2 meters per second, or training my volume at like 7.5 seconds for the 15 meters, doing those sets is actually going to be very different mechanics to what I'm actually doing at the 360. So what I think would be good would be working in 15 meters with time targets, where I've done my 360 for 11 seconds. Right, like one of my next session could be, right, 5 sets of 15 meters, sub 10, go as heavy as possible with that. And I could be like basically getting up to, say, whatever, 320, 330-ish. But my mechanics aren't going to be that much different to the 360. It's just going to carry over quite well. I'm just going to be going that little bit faster. And then week 2, it could be, right, accumulate 3 to 5 sets at the 10 seconds at the 320 to 330 range. And then I'm getting more consistent with that speed. You understand what I'm getting at, Shane?
Yeah. What do you think, just out of interest, what do you think your recovery would be like? Because obviously 360 yoke is a heavy, for an under 90, it's fucking heavy. Well, it's heavy anyway, isn't it? But for under 90 especially, it's a heavy yoke. Have you ever done yoke that kind of consistently that heavy? And because I know a lot of viewers, listeners would be thinking about yoke flu and all this. What's your opinion on doing stuff like this heavy?
It is literally how much you have put in at your base, and like your peak. You're going to be able to put more work in at the top end at higher percentages if you built your conditioning through I suppose being consistent for a while with lighter weights. Like, I remember, Shane, doing that. Do you remember when I did that fucking 1 mile yoke? I did a 4-week block. I did the 1 mile yoke. First week was 150. Second week was 180 for a mile. Week 3 was half a mile with 200. Week 4 was 220 for half a mile. And then I went back into more traditional ways. I was doing like 10 sets of 20 meters at like fucking 260-ish. Was feeling like a joke after that little block of conditioning. Like a couple of people messaged me. Curtis was one of them, actually. Curtis messaged me saying, like basically calling me out on it, saying that he just didn't think it was going to be effective or whatever. And I just said, the rationale behind it for me is like, I've got time now. So when I need to peak it for a comp, I'm going to be laughing because my recovery is going to be so much better than person X, person Y. And then I've trained it every week since. And then it came to the England's prep where it was, 300 yoke for 15 meters drop and turn or whatever.
Yeah.
Literally in that prep for England's, I was doing like comp weight for 3 sets every week alongside my other stuff. And it felt I was able to just aim at picking up my times. I wasn't thinking about recovery at all. Like, my recovery is like so good on it. I find it so easy to recover from. Like, I feel like I could do, say, 330, 340 yoke every day and like be absolutely fine and not negatively affect anything else. But my point is, it is just like any other exercise in terms of building that base and building that recovery base. But on the flip side of that, I do understand that some people aren't privileged enough to have access to a yoke every week. I've trained it every week for 1.5 years or something, like without missing, and that is why my recovery is so good on it, because I've actually accumulated shitloads of volume over time, just like any other exercise. But I know that practically it'll be a little bit more difficult than, say, somebody who just has a barbell and plates at the minute. So, but yeah, you can I'm confident I'll be going over, like, I can go over 300 yoke every week for the next 9 months, no problem. And I'll get
the people who say that, I imagine, have probably, like you say, not done yoke for 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
Gone to an event session and done a fucking max yoke over 20 meters, and then got up the next day feeling crippled. And that's where it's come from. Because I think very common in strongman and moving events. Speaking about problems people have in moving events as well, go back to that, it kind of leads on from this point, is people don't train them week in, week out. And like you're saying with the recovery, you build, like, people deadlift and press every single week without fail. I would actually probably say most strongmen probably bench more than they do moving events, which is not even a, I think it's a great assistance movement, but it shouldn't take priority over, if you can take that out to fit something else in that's more specific, you should. So I always think, if you've got time to bench, obviously if you don't have the kit, that's a different, scenario, but you've got time to do some kind of moving work. And I think doing moving events is something that you just have to do every single week. And like Josh just said, even if it's light and doing stuff like building up your volume accumulation, so start at 3 sets, go to 5 sets, go to 6, 7 sets, 8 sets. Once you're doing like 10 sets or 20 meters on a yoke at a reasonable weight, you're building up a lot of resilience. You're going to be mastering your position, because a lot of people don't understand on things like yoke is like where your hips are in relation to like your shoulders and the center of gravity of the yoke, and pushing the yoke slightly forward, or pulling it. You can move the center of gravity of the yoke slightly with your hands, and there's a lot of like micro adjustments you can make to make it feel better, basically, and not take as much out of you. And I know that's something you commented on with your long distance yokes, was because it was so light, you were able to feel, I think you were saying like you were feeling when you were getting a bit of back pump or something, and you were like,
but then I could alter the positioning, and I was like, oh my God, like if I took my pelvis here, my back I can't feel it in my back whatsoever. It feels weightless.
Yeah. So if you do the volume at the lighter weights, these are things you're going to be able to pick up on. If you don't, and it's just heavy, you can't really think when you're under like a big heavy yoke. You're just going to be thinking about stepping and making it. Whereas if you light enough where you can think and learn, then you're going to be able to take that resilience you've built and positions and apply them weekly to heavier yokes later down the line. So same thing on farmers, same thing on like front carries. I think it basically holds true to pretty much any strongman moving event, really, is if you do the volume and the work, then you're going to be able to, peak better because your foundations are better. These are just simple training principles that are applied in every other strength sport. But for some reason in strongman, with events, they just get tracked differently. And I don't know why. It's quite strange really when you think about it.
Yeah, but that recovery thing is just priceless. And it made me realize when we were training in lockdown 1, I think it was, and Luke Davis came down to train at my dad's, and we trained yoke together, and we did 4 sets of 20 meters with 320, and then put it up to 360 for 20 meters on the last set. And he was fucked for a while after that, like, as in he said to me, it was like, it was tough for him to recover from, if you will.
Yeah.
But I was fine, and I was training the next day, and like, the kind of neural fatigue or what, like my recovery was just, I'm not saying better than, I'm not saying better than Luke. I'm saying that he is stronger. He would beat me at yoke at any kind of weight, and he's a lot stronger at yoke. But I'm saying that my recovery from that particular stimulus that day was like, even in between sets and stuff, he would like, I was ready to go because I was like wanting to fit my other stuff in, and so my point is like, you can improve the recovery aspect of, like, can't get my words out, but basically you can.
Yeah, what you got to think as well is not only what you're saying about recovery between session, but once you build this, because this is the thing that I always fucking talk about Luke R, but the thing that impresses about Luke R is it's really common in open weights to be a bit like that, where they like take 2 minutes between sessions and stuff. But because he's done the graph like that,
Yeah.
Because the reason why I like him as an example is people always used to use the argument with me when I was in like me younger days doing this all the time. Oh, it's because you're an under 90. It's because you're small. It's because you're fitter.
Yeah.
You don't know what it's like. And I always thought, I don't believe that, but I could never prove it because I wasn't under 90 doing it. You know what I mean? So that's why I like to use him as an example, because every time somebody says it to me now, I go, well, nope. Top guys do it now as well. But he's able to do so much work in one session.
Yeah.
That he probably triples what most people do.
Yeah, that's it. That's brilliant. Like I feel like my recovery from all my different events that I train is better than most people that I see. And the reason behind that is not because I'm 90-ish kilos. Like, I genuinely believe if more people trained a little bit more like me on certain events, then their recovery would be better.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's 100% true, because you've really changed the way I approach a lot of stuff. And I used to train events like that myself, but I didn't know why I was doing it, if that makes sense. I just enjoyed it. Like, I used to love CrossFit. So I used to do stuff like on my events, I'd do Grace with a tire and stuff, 30 flips for time, and I do farmers EMOMs for 10 minutes, 20 meters. Like, it's just the same stuff, really, but I just used to like that style of training when I did my events. I just used to enjoy it more. And then that's what I always felt like. But people were, it's just because you're recovering. It's and then I used to think, oh, maybe it is. I don't know. But then as I've got older and wiser, I've just realized that it's not some magical exercise that doesn't respond to the same, principles that everything else does. You accumulate your volume, you master your position and technique, then you can handle more work at the heavier weights. You can handle more work per session and then recover between sessions better. Therefore, can train it more frequently, more consistency, and you'll get stronger at it. So that's the biggest mistake with moon events. Not only not timing it, but just not doing the fucking work. Like, everybody wants to go yoke and put a big heavy weight on. And like I said at the start about being relatable to your competition events, the amount of guys I've seen online that, like, 105ers that are yoking 400 kilos every couple of weeks, and they're just snails pacing it.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I guess if you're training for Worlds, one comp, and you wanting to do because I know Worlds Official Strongman Games has crazy heavy events in, unless you're specifically training for that, it's not a very good motor pattern to drill, because those same guys are the same speed with 300 as they are with 400. So it doesn't really matter if you go into a comp with a 310 yoke. It doesn't matter if you've done 450. If you're 15 seconds, you're 15 seconds. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So to wrap up,
I'll tell you who I'll call out. No one will listen to this. Lewis Beaumont. That's who I think about when I think about big heavy yokes. Do you know who he is? I think he's called Lewis.
Yeah.
He's a 105, he's jacked, like, so I'll give him that. But I see him every 2 or 3 weeks yoking 420, and I'm thinking, stop yoking 420. Like, stop it. Because he's walking with it, waddling, and I'm thinking, come on, mate, let's get fast with 330. It'll do you so much better as an athlete. And then the next week, you'll walk 430 again in 27 seconds. I'm like, come on, mate. Some free friendly advice there, Lewis.
So to wrap up, we've established that we believe that training moving events, it's just the same principles of what people train on the deadlift and the overhead. You'll go through however you structure your periodize your training, whether you do whether you call it hypertrophy volume block and you go into heavier and then you go into max strength, whatever, whether you just cycle these kind of intensities throughout the week all the time, like someone like me. The point is that you get a lot of value from, say, deadlifting and doing your overhead stuff at 50 to 60%, where you're working on their technique and positions and your recovery is good, etc., and doing speed work. Exactly the same principle applies to your moving events. If you're thinking, oh, great, this has got me thinking, but I'm really struggling at the minute because I've got no access to yoke, no access to farmers, no access to front carries, I'll give you an easy solution. So what I'm doing with a lot of quite a few of my clients at the minute who are reluctant to get outside because they haven't got kit, they haven't got the farmers, they haven't whatever, to train and build that conditioning base. What I'm getting people to do is I'm getting people to do like a lot of marching. So they're doing stuff like say for instance, if you have access to a trap bar or a frame, you can do grip marches instead of doing like say sets of 20 meters. What I'd say is do a set of 40 steps. When people saw me doing this, in lockdown 1, they thought I was taking the piss. But honestly, like the stuff that we've talked about in terms of building a conditioning base of you hold something heavy and then you're marching with it. You're having to stabilize through one side of your body, and that's going to carry over to when you're actually moving with stuff. How you can do your yoke, you can do your heavy your heavy unracks. You can do it like you're walking out a back squat, but then just march, and you're going to be able to go a lot heavier than like say your squat max, and you're going to build up that specific conditioning that's going to enable you to recover better when you get back to your moving events. In terms of front carries and medleys, what you can do is just so fucking simple. Like at the end of like say your log session, is just grab your log, hold your log in the position that you're in just before you start to dip to go into the clean, and just bring your knees up towards the log and march in that position. You'll be able to go heavy as fuck with that as well. You'll be able to go heavier than your max log, and you're stabilizing that object in front of you whilst having to work on that control, that unilateral control of working on one leg at once. And then you could even employ the stuff that Max said the other week about doing the heavy front rack stuff. You do that with some marching, and you're going to get that you're just going to build a really great conditioning base for when you come back to training your moving events. All these like kind of aches and pains that people get. Oh, my knees are sore, my foot's sore, I've got plantar fasciitis, I've got my ankles are sore, my shin splints, I've got back pump, all this fucking shite. You can iron all that out with, because if you feel any of that at the minute when you're doing these marches, all you do is adjust the load and put the load down to something that is pain-free, and then build up the tolerance and build up that base. And then I promise you, when you get back to doing your moving events, it's just, you're going to recover so much better and be able to peak. Like, remember that saying, it's so cheesy, but it's so true. Like, the broader the base, the higher the peak. Yeah.
Good shit.
All right, mate. Diddle-a-dum-dum. Peace out, motherfuckers.